Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Malin of a horse, Graafstroom. Graafstroom is a 5-year-old that was started. It sounds like he got off to a bad start, became a bucker, and had trouble staying on him, and then sent him to another trainer who was able to do some work with him, and he's kind of been down that path of just not really getting a good start, is what I would say. Most of the problems that you talk about here are simply problems that started because somebody didn't recognize when they started the horse to begin with that the horse wasn't ready to ride, and then the horse bucks somebody off, and then down the road you go. The big thing with any horse is just starting off is give them the time to really relax and stretch into the frame and to begin to get in this mental state of getting in the zone, as you hear me talk about very often. I mean, I would never get on a young horse that hasn't gotten to that point in the lunging where they just really relax, get deep in the stretch, and seem to get in that place where everything completely relaxes, and that they accept that work before going on to the next level. This biggest mistake I see with people with young horses all the time, is they try to get too much too soon, and then that they don't recognize the fact that just because you can get on the horse and ride it, that for a moment that maybe you should. Once again, if the horse hasn't really settled into the contact with the aids before you get on, you stand a very good chance of getting hurt, because if something goes wrong, even if the horse is calm in the beginning, once again, this is where people make this mistake, they get on and then something happens. Something spooks the horse, or even just the act of going from a walk to trot or into a canter or something, and the horse hasn't really settled over its back without a rider up there, and then something goes wrong, they get somebody off, and that starts the vicious downward cycle. And the good news is, however, all you really have to do with all these kind of horses, as you've already found out, is simply go back to the beginning and start all over again, and wait for the horse to get in that point. Remember, it always takes about 2 years. If you read any of the older books on training, even training things like fox hunters, I mean, how people would take them out and they would not take them right out in the field, but hilltop them for a couple of years even before they thought about going into the field, because anybody that's really has ever fox hunted knows that you can take a young horse that seems very calm, and all of a sudden they're out with 100 horses galloping across country, and you find you have something very different on your hands, because you find out that the horse wasn't really trained, which is what I was talking about before, about this issue of getting on horses too soon, expecting too much too soon, taking horses out, for instance, on trails too soon. Just because a horse is calm and seems calm in a ring and listens to most of what you say in a ring doesn't mean it's going to be that way when you take it out on a trail and a wild turkey jumps out under it. I say that because I have a good friend who was badly injured because of a wild turkey jumping out, at him on a young horse, and he went off of it and bled 3/4 of blood into his skin. And so I've just seen so many of these kinds of accidents, and so many people needlessly hurt by not recognizing how long it takes to really get a young horse into the state where it's going to be predictable in all kinds of environments. I see absolutely no point in taking a horse out of a riding arena that isn't in the aids in the riding arena. You stand very little chance of surviving. As I said, I've seen horses go off cliffs with people. I've seen them jump in front of cars with people on them. You name it, I've seen it all happen from people being on horses that simply weren't trained enough. They didn't have enough training to override their natural tendencies when they got scared. And that's really what real training does, which has a lot to do with trust. Very often when we see, for instance, these horses that have been roll curred, and at the Olympic Games, and these upper level riders have started saying, well, these horses are just under so much pressure, in the stands, when the people cheer and this sort of stuff, this is why they freak out. No, they freak out because they've been trained in a very horrible, brutal manner, so that when they hear the crowds cheering, they think it's the next blow coming. So of course they run off, and we see so many of these people and horses that were, these people that were advocates of this roller thing. Their horses don't even stand still. How they possibly score the scores that the judges have given some of these people in the past. I mean, how does one get an 8 on a halt when the horse never actually halts but stands there and piafs in place, is beyond my ability to understand. And once again has led to the degradation of our beloved sport. So thinking about all these things as we move forward. Now with this one, I think you're doing the right thing to just go back to the beginning. The question here with this one is when she tries to get him more active, he becomes more agitated and throws his head in the air and some of these kinds of things. And you're very right just to slow down, just what you're doing here, walking. If he's a little too slow, I'd certainly rather have the horse be a little too slow than running around like a lunatic, and resisting the aids. So Different horses are different. Hot horses generally have to be calmed down. Horses that are extremely cold-blooded have to be kind of heated up a little bit. So, but we want to end up at the same place in the middle with a horse that moves actively off of our legs, with good impulsion that moves through the body of the horse because its back is round and it's able to. And we begin to have that feeling of being able to ride the energy that's produced by the horse rather than just, beating this physical being around an arena. Once again, that real impulsion, which is the expression of the horse's physical abilities, expressed through a correctly developed body that allows the energy to move through the back, which can only happen if the horse's back is up, which is the only way anything of any real solidity, so to speak, can really happen with a horse. And once again, that's what puts the shock absorbers on the horse and allows the horse to do the work we ask them to do without injuring itself. So what you're doing here, I think, is off to the best thing you can do with this horse is just starting him off in the stretch, in the walk, just what you're doing here. Now, is it a little slow? Yes, it's a little bit slow, but I would rather have it a little slow and relaxed than fast and tense. A lot of people take the attitude that, they try to wear horses down every day. We'll take a hot horse and, well, we have to wear it out. So we'll run around and lunge it on the end of the canter on the end of a lunge line for a half an hour to calm the horse down. Well, the problem is that when we do that, if the horse is of any kind of a blood horse, that is, it has a little thoroughbred in them, they're going to get hotter and hotter and hotter, and the longer it takes to wear them down. This is why we see people, it should never take you longer on a normal day than about 30 minutes to lunge a horse. If it's taking much more than that after you've done it the first few times, it might take a little longer. Or let's say you start with a horse that, that is starting with too much energy. Sometimes we have to go a little longer than we like, but if we're doing this correctly, every day that will become shorter, the amount of time you spend lunging, rather than longer. Until you get it down to about 20 minutes would be about what it takes to lunge a horse. Sometimes even 10, 5 in each direction. I have many horses, I bring them out, and they get to the phase where I haven't started to ride them before I lunge yet, but they'll go down and they'll lunge like literally 3-4 minutes. They're right into a stretch and right into that zone, and then I just get right on. And so once again, when we're doing young horses, it's always best to keep working with a system. That is, we do the same things in the same steps each day. Then the horse is able to gain confidence in the work. It understands the work and it knows what's coming instead of constantly surprising the horse with new things. So our foundation warm-up work every day should be the same. Then we try to push the training forward a little bit each day by asking for something new or something in a little better way. As soon as I get that, I move on. I don't try to do 10 new things in a day. I don't try to improve 10 things in a day. I just keep trying to improve that connection over the top line, and then slowly introduce new things as I need them, so to speak, or as they are ready to be taught to the horse. That is, if the horse is ready in the right mental state to move on to the next thing. The beauty, once again, of stretching horses, however, is even if we make mistakes, and all of us are going to make mistakes. I make mistakes in training horses. But as soon as I feel I've made a mistake, I come right back to the stretch and the horse will forgive me. Whereas if you make a mistake and just keep making the same mistake and then start beating up the horse for it, which is your mistake, then we have a horse that starts to hate the work and doesn't trust the rider. And then it becomes, once again, this sort of rent string mentality of forcing horses into doing things that they don't want to do and are ill-prepared to do, which is, once again, where most resistance has its origins in people asking horses to do things they aren't prepared to do, even if that's just walk around an arena. If you haven't done it the way you're doing it here already and have the horse swinging and active in the walk, and before you get on them, it's just going to be that much more difficult when you do. So learning how to work this groundwork is so important to your safety as well. For instance, if you had started this horse correctly, and I have started thousands of horses, so I can tell you that I speak with some authority on this, and I've started horses of every kind you can possibly imagine, and the result is always the same. If I simply wait till the horses are in the aids on the lunge line before I get up, or in the case of horses that are lethargic, simply I've let them develop enough impulsion to get on and begin to ride and have some degree of control. So what you're doing here is just the right thing for this horse, just going back to the beginning. Now she's lunging him on just a halter because the horse seems to get upset with bit contact, which tells me somewhere along the way, once again, in the beginning, that's where all these sort of problems should have been solved, was in the very beginning. When you first started this horse. I mean, to get on a horse before it has accepted contact with the bridle and settled into the contact, that's what the lunging is for. So when you get on, you have brakes, and you have something that you can communicate with. If you get on a horse that hasn't accepted contact with the bit even yet, what do you think is going to happen? Once again, the horse might go around the ring calmly for a while, but the first time something spooks the horse, or the horse doesn't want to do something that you've asked it to do, you're going to find very quickly that you really have no control and no real means of communicating with the horse, because the horse will just suddenly blow off everything you're doing because it hasn't been confirmed in the aids. So take your time to do this in the beginning with your young horses. Never get on a young horse until it has accepted contact and is stretching into the contact with the bridle with side reins, long side reins that you guys see me do, or with the shambone, one or the other. Or even if, once again, once we get to the point where the horse will stretch, you don't need either of those things. The horse will stretch into the contact with your hand with nothing on there whatsoever, just with a line connected to the inside ring of the bridle. So while this walk is a little bit slow here, it's certainly in the direction of what you want to do. And the beauty of the walk is that you can do a lot of it. So you can spend a lot of time here at the walk. And there are sometimes, with every horse that we ever train, there's a point at which if we go faster than a certain speed and the horse is hollow, the speed, that is the inertia, that is the horse's body, and the horse weighs quite a bit. So there's a lot like a train. It takes a lot longer for a train to slow down than it does a car because a train has so much mass. Well, the same thing is true of a horse. It takes a lot longer for a horse that's not over its back to stop than it does for a cat or a dog or an animal that is much smaller or lighter, because they don't have the inertia that the mass of the horse's body accumulates. So we want to keep that into consideration. So when we lunge, so that's why we never let horses to just run around endlessly on the end of the lunge line, because after a certain speed, that's not forward. Once again, that's kind of that thing of people confusing moving forward with what forward actually means. Forward means to engage forward from behind into the body. It does not mean to run around the arena. So this is another huge misconception that I see people doing all the time. They think forward means to go faster. Now, sometimes, there are horses that are very dull that we just try to get to move a little faster, but that's very different than letting, an excited horse run as fast as it can on the end of a lunge line. So once again, remember that after a certain speed, there's nothing the horse can do but run on his forehand, because the mass of the horse, the inertia in the horse, is just driving the horse onto the forehand. So we have to be careful about that and never let a horse run around. I mean, not to say that they might do it once in a while on the lunge line, but we take steps to stop that from happening right away. And we never try to use lunging just to wear a horse out. What lunging should be used, like you're doing here. And you should never get out of a walk with a horse, if you can avoid it, until they're relaxed and stretching all the way down. Now, sometimes with young horses that are very excitable, we don't want to hold them back either. So we have to let those kind of horses go a little bit before we can get control. That is, to let them move naturally and just keep them moving forward. Now remember, if a horse ever bucks on the lunge line, which is where the correction of bucking ought to start, the thing that you should do is send the horse forward. That is, to just tap him with the whip and let him move forward until he stops bucking. You never want to stop a bucking horse and pat him on the neck, because once again, you will have just rewarded them for doing that, which is one of the biggest mistakes I see with beginners all the time, is they have this idea that when a horse is a little bit afraid, or what they perceive to be fear, which is that the horse is suddenly looking at something, is that they stop and pat him on the neck. Now, a horse that is truly afraid will start shaking with you. That's a horse that is really afraid. And if you're ever on a horse that starts trembling with you, immediately get off of that horse, because that's a horse that's about to lose its mind. And those are the kind of horses that will jump in front of a car with you, they'll flip over on you, all of the above. So if you ever feel a horse trembling underneath you, by all means, just quietly step off and go back to groundwork or something like that until you get the horse calm. But you don't want to reward them. My point being is you wouldn't want to reward them, pat on the neck. I mean, even with the ones that's trembling, just get off, and send them back around on a lunge line until they just relax again. So what you're doing here is good, and I think it's a good approach to this horse with the problems that you've told me about. Now, this horse was gelded. Before he was gelded, this one, he was having all these bucking problems, these sort of things. But I have yet to have seen a horse in my life that this whole bucking thing wasn't just something that they learned. And that should have been taken care of on the lunge line before anybody started riding the horse again. The first time that happened, they should have gotten him into the zone and stretching. But as we see, this horse is not over a stop line here. He's starting to relax a little bit for you. So we can clearly see that the origins of all this horse's problems came from the very beginning. Somebody got on this horse before he was ready to be ridden and ended up having a problem, and that just became an exacerbating vicious circle of fight. And the only way to solve the problem, happily, which is the simplest way to do anything, is just go back to the very beginning and start again. Which is what you have done here and what will lead you there. Now this trot is obviously very short and a little hollow. Head up in the air, he's dropping his back, and you can see how the hindquarters are kind of falling out behind. And as he starts to stretch a little bit even, now this horse never really gets there all the way, but you're certainly working in the right direction. Now, what would I do and what I will do when I see you, if this is about where we're still at, and I'll be seeing this horse in just a week or so here in Sweden, is to work this horse in hand, to get him stretching in hand before we go back to the lunging. And that's why this is such an important technique, this work in hand. And I suggest that you take a look at my videos on work in hand, and I certainly will be showing you that when I see you. That would be the first thing I would actually do with a horse like this, when I have a horse that doesn't want to stretch on the lunge line, especially ones that want to run on the lunge line. I would go back right away and work them in hand, teach them to stretch in hand without all the dynamic movement, and then go back and start again. But what you're getting here is at least he is starting to stretch. Yes, I would like to see more activity out of him. I'd like to see you, like at this point is where, you know, he's stretching enough that it's starting to improve. This is where I'd like to see you just send him on a little bit and see what happens. Now, depending on this horse, the trouble with lunging in just a halter is that if you have a horse that really is fractious, now he doesn't seem to be too bad here, but you know, in just a halter, if you started a young horse or something, if you don't have a round pen, you know, there's not much you can do to stop the horse if it decides to take off on you there, in the sense that, you know, a halter in itself, a real cavesson works against the soft tissue on the nose. Which is why also anybody that thinks that, now I do believe in starting young horses in a cavesson with just a bit in their mouth before they get there. But this whole concept now of everybody wanting to ride in bitless bridles is really wrong thinking. You can do just as much damage with a bitless bridle to the horse's soft cartilage of its nose. And, you know, all non-bitted bridles all work in the same way. They punish, instead of punishing the bars of the mouth, they punish basically the soft tissue of cartilage around the end of the horse's nose. So, you know, if you were to brutalize a horse with a cavesson, you could certainly do actually probably more or as much permanent damage as you could do with a bit in the horse's mouth. So once again, it's what you do with your hands. It's humans that are cruel, not necessarily bits, you know. People ask me all the time about what kind of bits I use. I only use one type of bit, a snaffle. I use a French link loose ring snaffle on all of my horses. It works perfectly fine on every horse. And then when my horses advance to the point that I might be using a double bridle, same thing, I have a loose ring snaffle in it. And just a very, very simple curved bit, very short, not, you know, 3-inch length shank on it is the maximum I would ever use. Now, people would ask me, why do I use the double bridle at all? And, you know, the double bridle used to be called the master's bridle, which really should be in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. And when you ride horses, you know how to use a double bridle correctly. All you ever use the curb for instance, if you have a horse that's become very locked up in its jaw and poll and isn't over its back, you know, that little bit of help to get you a little more flexion at the jaw. And once you understand that, that must be released immediately to the weight of the snaffle. So when you use a double bridle correctly, you are never keeping constant tension on the curb rein. Now, if you watch most people in Grand Prix today, you will see that the curb reins are straight back. They are punishing the horses all the time. If there's not a loop in that curb rein, it is incorrect and should be judged so. Now, this trot's starting to get much better here. It's starting to swing a little bit. So this is really a good job here, and this is starting to come really nicely. Yes, he needs to swing a little more, but look at the difference in how his back legs are moving here compared to how they were moving in the very beginning of this video, where they were literally falling out behind him. So if you got this and this calmly, this is exactly what you want to do. Let them come to it slowly in this horse's case, and then once you get here, now at this point is where I would begin to ask for a little more. So I begin to give him a little tap with the whip and sending him forward and ask for a little bit more activity. But I would rather have what he's doing here than have him running around the circle with his head up in the air. So, you know, this is more important than that would be. This is how you want to approach this horse. Once we get him working over the back, when he gets to here, he's in a good place. So now all we have to do from there is just gradually get him to swing a little bit more. But that's really good there. And once again, look how different this horse looks than when we first started. You know, the first picture of this horse, he came out, his neck looked like it was easily a foot shorter than it now is. And you can still see he has a little bit of a dip there behind the saddle there. That will all clear up here in the years to come. You'll see that all flatten out. You can see he still has a bit of a belly, so he hasn't really started pulling up through his core yet, though it's better than when we started. So I think for the history that you told me about this horse, I think you're really on track here. I will help you to get this happening a little bit sooner when I see you, but what you're doing here is the right approach to this horse. Just when you get him in that really good place, then just try to ask for a little bit more. That's simply it. But you got him into the stretch, and that's what's important. So once you get that, then all you simply have to do is start trying to get a little deeper swing out of the hind legs by sending him a little more actively forward under the body. Remember, that's what forward means, to engage forward under the body. It does not mean to run. You can run around a horse all day long. Once again, every horse, after a certain point of a speed, begins to drive the horse onto the forehand, on a horse that's bent not over its back. And that's what being over the back allows the horse to do. It allows you to ultimately be able to gallop and keep the horse over its back. And that's exactly what a good person does who trains race horses. If you go to any race and watch the race, you'll see horses running over their backs, and then you'll see the ones coming down the stretch, and they're throwing their heads up in the air. Those are horses that are galloping off their shoulders, just like many of the so-called Grand Prix jumping horses that we see today. You know, we've improved these horses so much, but in America, you know, we now have what used to be called a preliminary jumping class is now called a mini Grand Prix. You know, everybody wants to be Grand Prix riders, and these horses that we breed today are so talented at jumping. I mean, they literally jump 4 foot, you know, much easier than the horses that we used to work, thoroughbreds and these kinds of horses would jump over a single pole in the ground, you know. So people are getting by on the fact that these horses have so much natural talent, but on the same token, so many people are being killed and injured today, more so than ever before in riding, because they're not getting these horses actually working over their backs. So they're dangerous, which means if something goes wrong over a fence, they tend to flip over on top of people, fall down with people, all of these things. And you know, when horses, you know, it's one thing to fall off of a horse. It's another thing to have a horse fall on top of you. And those are the injuries that really injure people for life. So riding an out of balance horse is probably one of the dumbest things you could possibly do. And unfortunately, I've seen in my life, you know, having been joint master of a fox hunt and fox hunting all my life, I quit fox hunting for the very reason that in the areas, you know, most of the Midwestern hunts here where you attract a lot of people who haven't been hunting for years, and the hunt clubs go out and they love the idea of it, but they haven't really thought through the ramifications for the people. You know, there is nothing more dangerous and more thrilling, and really the test of a real rider's ability, as some of the old dressage trainers like Henry Wynne Malin from England used to talk about, how a horse was never considered, you know, trained until it was well and goodly hunted. And that's really, and I could say that a rider, you know, is kind of never really a rider until, you know, they have well and goodly hunted, in the sense that it really tests your abilities. That's why I was so drawn to it, and why I ended up as a 3-day event rider after that. Drew me to galloping cross country, and the challenge of having to read the footing ahead of us, having your horse over its back so that you're safe, and the horse can stay balanced. So as my father told me when I was 5 years old, that all great horsemen know the same thing, and if you figure that out, you'll be able to ride any horse. So I've spent my life trying to figure out what that was that he was talking about. And, you know, it's been a lifelong search. Even Mr. Oliveira, when you'd ask him questions, he would never really directly answer a question, other than to say, if you asked him what it meant to, you know, have your horse round, he would just say, make your horse round like a ball, you know, make a fist and show you a round ball. And it took me a long time of sitting to think about what exactly he was talking about by then. But so what I've tried to do in my work is simply to, you know, break down a lot of this classical work and come up with a way of teaching it to everybody, you know, that it makes sense once you understand what it is. And once you do, you never go back. I've never seen a rider in my life learn to ride correctly and then go back to riding badly. It just, you know, once you get the feel of horses working over their backs and you feel that wonderful sense of that lift through the back that lifts you up in the air, it makes riding so much more exciting and so much more fun. And it's the only way we'll ever get the horses really to be willing participants. And again, if you're holding against the mouth of a horse, you are punishing it all the time. The correct weight of the rein is just the weight of the rein between you and the horse, with a sense of a positive contact, but it's not a backwards tension against the mouth of the horse, which is the biggest problem that so many people in dressage are doing today. And I see it all over the place. I just recently looked at another one of these online training sites as something for everybody to look at, is how, and I looked at their logo, and their logo shows a horse with broken at the third vertebrae and sway back. And this is, an organization proclaiming to be, the sort of online clearinghouse for so-called dressage, with all these so-called famous trainers training on it. And I've gone through this site and looked at numerous of all these so-called well-known people. There wasn't a single horse in the dozen or two videos that I looked at briefly that were over their backs. It was just the same thing. People with hollow-backed horses trying to make sense of something that they don't understand. Because once you understand this, it's the foundation for everything in every horse sport. So this is looking a little more active in this direction. Still needs to stretch down a little deeper. I think right here, I think you could ask for a little bit more than you're doing. There you did a little bit, and it starts to swing a little more actively. So as far as I'm concerned, I think you're right on track with this horse. And what you're going to find is that, when he really gets settled into the contact like this and begins to trust your rider, as you've already discovered, his bucking and all these kinds of things will go away. And he'll become a willing participant, as they all do, if we do this in such a way that respects them. So really good work here with this horse. I think you're right on track for what this horse is able to do. And the problems that you've had in the past, I think you've come a long way to get beyond them. And once you understand these basic principles that guide training, anyone who rides as well as you do, that is, you're comfortable walk, trot, and cantering the horse. Now, you said you became a little trepidatious of this horse because it was bucking so many people off, and that's a good thing to be. Have a good respect. I've seen so many riders, who thought they were good riders, but they thought they were good because they were simply good at staying on. And this is something that I see bad riders make a big show of, whipping horses up, and they're all leaping up in the air and doing all this stuff. And, beginners are impressed by this. Oh, look at this rider. But a good rider never puts on a show like that. A good rider never loses their temper. A good rider rides a horse where it can be ridden safely and doesn't try to push through envelopes. Every one of those kind of riders, while I've seen them impress a lot of crowds, when I check back in of where they are, I hear about them a few years later. Guess what? They got flipped on. Guess what? They got kicked in the head. Guess what? They got kicked in the groin, or whatever the case may be. Because the reality is, if horses don't trust you, it is just a matter of time before one of them is going to hurt you. So keep that in mind. And as I said, there is karma when it comes to horses, because every person that I've ever seen that was a really brutal rider eventually came to no good, as they say, or as we used to say in the hunt field, they came a cropper, which means a farmer, which means a dirt digger, and unfortunately with their face sometimes. So it just amazes me. I go to the shows and I see trainers limping around. Well, what happened? Oh, that one got flipped on, yet he's out there teaching 10 people's little children. Which is also a message, to parents, if there are any parents watching my videos. I see parents, a lot of parents put their children into riding because they think it's going to be good for them, and they end up getting maimed for life because they're in training with trainers who do not understand how to train horses. Their horses are out of balance, and they're getting by on simply the talent of the horse until it goes wrong. I was at a horse show recently where I saw 4 children go to the hospital out of one single jumping class, and parents sitting there in the stands. One in the case where a trainer actually whipped the horse into the ring because the kid couldn't get the horse into the ring, whipped it into the ring. Of course, the kid went off of the first fence, broke his collarbone. Away we go. So parents, watch what these trainers are doing that you have your children in training with. And if it seems illogical, if there's a lot of yelling, if there's a lot of trainers screaming, kill the horse, and that sort of thing, or the first time they tell you the horse is no good, you need to look for a new trainer, because that's a trainer who's no good. Any sound horse can be trained to an amazingly high level if you take the patience to do it. So this has been a wonderful job with this horse today. I think you're right on track with this. I really look forward to seeing him. You said there was some question that maybe this wouldn't bring one of the horses that you bring to the clinic, but I think you should. I'd love to see you work this horse. And get you on track with him. So great job today, and you're doing just the right thing. You can never go wrong by erring on the side of safety and taking things slowly. You will save yourself a lot of trips to the hospital by virtue of doing that. So great job here today, and I look forward to seeing all our friends in Europe. I'll be leaving in about a week from yesterday, so I don't even have a week left, and we'll be seeing everybody over there and hopefully doing some videos along the way and keeping track of what everybody's up to and as the trip progresses. So really look forward to seeing everybody there, and keep on the good work. I love everybody on Facebook. If you haven't joined it, I highly recommend, if you watch this video, to join the Archery Ride Friends and Fans site on Facebook. You know, if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, everybody's helping each other on there. And that's what I envision. I envision a, you know, sort of adult pony club, if you will. The idea of people who know a little teaching everybody a little bit more. The basics are what's important. You know, everybody needs to get the basics right, and then we'll worry about, you know, I can help the rest of you go to the upper levels when you're ready. But if you help each other, and it helps you develop your eye so you can really see what's right and wrong, that's what we all need to do. Then we can help each other with our training. So by all means, folks, if you haven't done so, join that site, and you can put your videos up there, and everybody on there will help you train your horses as it should be. This is Will Faerber from Archery Ride. Look forward to seeing you soon, and in Europe.